Welcome to Higher Change. We're on chapter 16, La La Land. We're going to talk about states of consciousness, sleep, and rest. The main point of this lesson is that understanding the different stages of the sleep-wake cycle is important to understanding how the brain changes states of consciousness. In this lesson, we're going to talk about what it means to be conscious. We'll differentiate the different levels of consciousness. We'll describe the biological process of the sleep-wake cycle. We'll explain why we sleep and why we dream. And we'll identify the different stages of sleep. And then we'll differentiate some sleep disorders. And lastly, we'll look at how sleep and health are related to each other. First, let's understand the difference between consciousness and conscience. There are three words that are spelled similarly and are often confused, but they mean different things. What do they mean? Let's take a minute or a few minutes to understand how they're different. First, consciousness is a noun. It's defined as a person's awareness of everything that is going on in the world around her or him at any given moment, or being awake, basically. That's consciousness. So it's about awareness about the world around us and about ourselves. Basically, being awake. If someone is conscious, that's an adjective. That basically means that they are alert and aware of their surroundings. So this is related to the first. The only difference is that consciousness is a noun. It's the state of awareness. And conscious is the adjective, which basically describes somebody. Okay, so they're related. However, these should not be confused with a similar but different word, conscience, which is a noun, but it means an inner feeling or voice as acting as a moral guide to the rightness or wrongness of one's behavior. And Freud called this the superego, if you recall from his tripartite theory of personality. So that's conscience. So just to go into a little more depth on that, the words are confusing because both come from the same Latin word, conscire, and I don't know how to pronounce it because I don't speak Latin, but that's the root word, which implies being privy to or aware of something. So if you look at this diagram on the right, both actually come from the same root word, but they're applied to different things. So conscience comes from the Latin conscientia, which basically means being privy to or with the knowledge of, but referring to awareness of moral principles. So, for example, being conscientious, it's also a similar word, but it's also different from consciousness. Conscientious or conscience basically means we're sensitive to our moral principles. Conscientiousness is basically being sensitive to our conscience. Okay, so that's conscience. It's awareness of our moral principles. So if you look at that word science, it's about a science of principles. Okay, that might be a key word there, looking at the science of it. The other word is conscious. That's an adjective that comes from the Latin word conscius, plus an English suffix us, which implies a knowing with others or in oneself, or being aware of self and others. The clue, if we were to look at the difference between these words, the clue here is that it contains the word us, two letters us in it at the end. So I think that would be the key to differentiate. Conscience contains science, and it's about the awareness of moral principles. Conscious contains the word us, and it's about awareness about ourselves and others. I hope that helps clarify the difference. So again, conscious contains us, whereas conscience, science, contains science, and that's about the moral principles. So conscious is about awareness of self and others. So in other words, we are conscious of wrongdoing because it goes against our conscience or awareness of right and wrong. That's one way to simplify it. All right, let's talk about states of consciousness. I wanted to get that out of the way because it gets confusing if we don't understand the difference. So let's talk about states of consciousness or states of awareness. about our surroundings. So, there are two states of consciousness. First is the waking state. That's main states of consciousness. The first main state is being awake or alert. And that's our normal day-to-day state of awareness. That's waking state. The other is an altered state of consciousness. And we're going to go into that more in detail in a future chapter, but altered states of consciousness would include sleep and also being under the influence of substances or in a trance-like state. But for this lesson, we're just going to focus on sleep as an altered state of consciousness. Being in a coma might also be considered an altered state of consciousness as well. But for this lesson, we're going to focus on being awake and being asleep. Awakened state is when our thoughts, feelings, and sensations are the most clear. Altered states of consciousness describe a shift in the quality or pattern of a person's awareness or mental activity as compared to a normal waking consciousness. Okay, so again, it's waking and altered states of consciousness. Okay, there's also two main states that our brain can be in, and that can be, or the way we're thinking, or how conscious we may be of our thoughts. So the first state is involves controlled processes, and this is basically more about our focus. Are we focused on what we're doing or not? So controlled processes would be when we are focused on, our mind is very alert and we're focused on what we're doing. We're paying attention to our surroundings. So like the picture of somebody playing pool. Obviously, this is going to require your focused attention if you want to do well. On the other hand, other things might include automatic processes. That's different from controlled processes because controlled processes involve your immediate attention. But automatic processes are things that we may learn to do automatically without actually being fully conscious of what we're doing. So, for example, we can ride a bike. Now that's debatable. If you're not really used to riding a bike, it might require a lot of your attention. But if you're used to walking and running and riding a bike, and if that comes second nature to you, then you could do it without even thinking about it. A lot of people, for example, go to work and they drive to work and they'll be so lost in their thoughts that they forgot to turn off, or they might continue driving in a certain direction that they usually go, and they might make, if they have to go to a different location, they might forget to take the turn that they need to take because they're so focused on, or they're not actually focused on what they're doing. They do it automatically. So that would be these would be examples of automatic processes. Controlled processes are those that require conscious attention to a fairly high degree, like driving a car, having a conversation, that sort of thing. While automatic processes require comparatively low level of conscious awareness, like walking or riding a bike, particularly if it's something like riding a bike you are very familiar with. If you've never ridden a bike before, then that would be a controlled process. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So let's talk about the brain during sleep. What happens to the brain as we're entering sleep? Because that helps us to understand how the brain changes its states of consciousness. So first of all, there's a circadian rhythm, and this controls the sleep-wake cycle of bodily rhythm that occurs over a 24-hour period, and one cycle takes about a day to complete. So this matches the rotation of our planet, and that's how our bodies are designed. They match the rhythms of the day and night cycle. And so the circadian rhythm is that sleep-wake cycle that lasts 24 hours. The cycle is regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the internal clock that tells people to wake up or fall asleep. which is located in the hypothalamus, a tiny section of the brain that influences the glandular system. So the suprachiasmatic nucleus is something you should know. Again, that is located in the hypothalamus, and it is the internal clock. It tells people to wake up or fall asleep. Now, there's several explanations that have been given to why we sleep. People who believe in evolution have a theory that sleep evolved to be at night because that's when predators were the most active, and so that's when we would go to sleep. We don't need to be running around when we'd be more prone to predators. The restorative theory of sleep is a theory of sleep that proposes that sleep is necessary to the physical health of the body and serves to replenish chemicals and repairs cellular damage. And so this is something that's very important we're going to talk about later as we talk about the health benefits of sleep. But that's the restorative theory. We'll talk a lot about that. Sleep deprivation or a loss of sleep that results in irritability, an increase in concentration problems, an inability to perform simple tasks, and microsleep, which are brief sidesteps into sleep lasting only a few seconds. So this is all due to sleep deprivation. For example, if you've been going without sleep, you might find yourself slipping into a little tiny sleep. Now, that may not be a problem unless you're in a critical situation like driving, for example. Some people will be driving all night and then their eyes will start to shut without them even realizing it. And that's dangerous because just a few seconds of your eyes being closed could get you killed, especially if you're driving. There are 3 stages of the sleep-wake cycle. We are either awake or asleep, so that could be the 2 main categories, except that being asleep is divided further into 2 different types of sleep. There is non-REM sleep and REM sleep. We're going to talk about what that is later, but you should first know that the 3 stages of the sleep-wake cycle are being awake, then there's non-REM sleep, and then REM sleep. And REM sleep is basically when we're dreaming. So that's the deepest part of our sleep. And non-REM is that transition area of sleep that doesn't involve sleeping, or it doesn't involve dreaming, but it still slows the brain down so that it can. And that's also part of sleep. So if you look at this, actually the amount of sleep we need throughout our lives changes in proportion. So as you can see, a baby, and this, according to this chart shows you the amount of sleep that people get at a certain age, or that they need at a certain age. So at the beginning on the left side is where infants are at. And as you can see, they are sleeping more often than they're awake, which is convenient for the parents who are adjusting to a newborn. They sleep a lot. They sleep more than they're awake. And when they're awake, they're crying a lot. So yeah, 16 hours out of 24, they're sleeping, and they're only awake for eight of those hours. Now, as we get older, seniors they require less and less sleep, down to 6 hours of sleep. But also, we want to look at how much REM sleep people get. So infants, they are dreaming half the time that they are sleeping. So of the 16 hours that they're sleeping, 50% of that, or 8 hours, they're actually dreaming. And we know that because the eyes move. And and we can also look at brain activity as well. But after that first year, the REM sleep drops off drastically, and so does sleep overall. And then the amount of sleep required drops down to 12 hours a day for a toddler, and it continues to decline to about 8 hours a day for an average adult. But even then, among a part of that sleep, you can see that the amount of REM sleep that we typically get each night is only a couple hours out of a total of 8 hours each night. Okay, so infants need far more sleep than older children and adults, which is actually a problem because many people have a hard time getting their child to sleep. And so it's really key to make sure that your child is getting adequate sleep because it can affect their development. Now, both REM sleep and non-REM sleep decreases dramatically in the first 10 years of life, with the greatest decrease in REM sleep. As I said, nearly 50% of an infant's sleep is REM, compared to only 20% for a normal, healthy adult. Okay, so we talked about the main stages or states of consciousness and the stages of entering into sleep. That was awake, non-REM, and REM. But let's look at the stages of sleep more in detail. First are types of brain waves when falling asleep. And one easy way to remember this is using the acronym BATD, B-A-T-D. This should help you remember the different types of brain waves in order. So B stands for beta waves. When we're wide awake, our brains register smaller and faster brain waves that indicate a person is wide awake and mentally active. So you can see this is normal waking state, and as you can see, the brain waves they're wide and active, just like a person's wide awake, okay, and mentally active. Now, as someone is about to go to sleep, they start to produce alpha waves. These are brain waves that indicate that a person is relaxed or drowsy. This is pre-sleep. So you can see that the waves become more looser, not as wide, and that's basically it. So it's just not as pronounced, not as wide. So those are alpha waves. Then theta waves are when a person is entering a light sleep. This is the first stage of sleep. A light sleep is known as N1. As you can see, the waves are flattening out, and there's still some bumps, as you might call it, but they're definitely a lot more flatter. And those are theta waves. And then the last type are delta waves. That at least you should know. Some people also refer to gamma waves, but for this purpose, we're just focusing on these four. So delta waves are the slowest and longest waves when a person has entered deep sleep. So deep sleep, it almost looks like the brain is flatlined, except that obviously there's still some motion, still some waves, but it really looks a lot flatter. And this is known as N3. This is the deepest state of sleep outside of REM, which we're going to look at. So there are three stages of non-REM sleep. Again, we haven't talked about REM sleep just yet. These are the three stages of non-REM sleep right before we get to REM. So those three stages are N1, N2, and N3. N1 is when we are in a light sleep. We might experience hypnagogic images or a hypnic jerk. And this is basically when we are imagining things, we see things that we're imagining, or we might experience the feeling of falling, and we might, and that feels like a quick jerk in our body, and that has a lot to do with our brain and our bodies falling asleep. Sometimes those things can occur. N2 is indicated by the presence of sleep spindles, which are basically bursts of brain activity. So as you look at the brain waves are slowing down for the most part, but every once in a while you'll see these little spindles. And this phase is when the body's temperature, breathing, and heart rate decrease. So this is different from N1 and N3 in the sense that while the brain waves are slowing down, first of all, one main difference are the sleep spindles, which are those bursts of activity, but also this stage is marked by changes in body temperature, and the breathing is slowing down, and the heart rate decreases. And these things can really slow down a lot if you're paying attention or monitoring your heart rate and breathing. Now, obviously, you wouldn't be able to monitor it yourself. You would have to use an app or machine, or having someone else monitor it for you. But that's how you would know. Okay, and the last stage is N3. And this is highlighted by the appearance of delta waves. N1, if you recall, is more the theta waves. And then the N3 is highlighted by the appearance of delta waves. And these are the slowest and longest waves. It feels like the brain has flatlined, except that it hasn't. There's still some waves, but they're longer and slower. This is when growth hormones are released, and it's also the hardest for a person to wake up. Now, this is different from REM sleep because we're going to look at how brain waves actually change during REM sleep. But outside of that, this is actually still a really hard time to wake up because you are in a really deep sleep. And this is when the body's recharging itself. You have growth hormones, and it's really hard to wake up. Okay, so the last stage of sleep really is rapid eye movement. Well, actually, and then after the rapid eye movement, there's a coming out of that phase, but that's not really a phase or stage we really focus on. It's just a brief transition. But the last main one is the rapid eye movement. And this is a stage of sleep in which the eyes actually move rapidly under the eyelids, and the person is typically experiencing a dream. So it's like they are looking at something visually, but they're not there. It's not there because the eyelids are closed. And that's because your eyes are looking internally, I guess you could say. It's looking at what you're imagining in your dreams. And it's also been theorized that this is part of how the brain processes the information in this state. REM sleep is also known as a paradoxical sleep because there's actually a high level of brain activity. And so if you look at that line in the middle of the screen, you can see how it actually looks like very busy in comparison to the long, slow waves of the delta waves. And so it's paradoxical because now the brain is actually going into higher level activity. So what is it doing? Are you actually awake? No, your brain is actually doing its own processing. It's like your brain is going to the cleanup mode. It's taking care of business now, as you could say, while you're under the sleep state. We've looked at some of the stages of sleep, and we're going to look at the health benefits of getting good quality sleep. But before we do that, we need to understand that there are some disorders that can prevent you from getting good quality sleep. So these are in the category of sleep disorders. A large number of problems and disorders are associated with sleep, such as insomnia. Insomnia is a difficulty in falling asleep and staying asleep. But a lot of people don't realize that insomnia is more than just the difficulty in falling asleep. Some people also wake up early. They may wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning and have trouble going back to sleep. So overall, insomnia is about the difficulty in getting good quality sleep. Now, if you're having insomnia, a lot of times people will just try to force themselves to go to sleep, but that sometimes doesn't work. Otherwise, you might end up just staying in bed until the sun comes up. So some people suggest getting up and moving around and trying to get some water or something like that. Now, you don't want to go watch TV or go on your phone because that'll just stimulate your brain back and you'll have more difficulty going back to sleep. But if you move around and stretch yourself out and take some deep breaths, you might find that it will help you relax, and then you can go back to sleep later. Another common sleep disorder would be restless leg syndrome. While it's more than just a sleep disorder, because it can happen at other times, it is a very common sleep disorder because it prevents people from falling asleep. Essentially, it's a strong urge to move one's legs. If you've ever been trying to fall asleep and you feel your legs are wanting to stay awake when the rest of your body wants to go to sleep, that would be restless leg syndrome. The actual cause for this is unknown. There is a small link with ADHD, and this could be due to a deficiency in a neurotransmitter like dopamine. But it could also be due to a deficiency in iron or magnesium. And restless leg syndrome is worsened by dehydration or not getting enough water. When I've experienced restless legs when I'm trying to go to sleep, I find that if I go to get some water, oftentimes that helps me to go to sleep. But it could also be due to something else. That's why it's important to get it checked out if you have a chronic issue with this. Another common sleep disorder is sleep apnea. This is a disorder in which the person can stop breathing for nearly half a minute or more. And this can have some potentially life-threatening complications because it's interfering with your breathing. And if you're not getting enough oxygen, that can cause damage. So this may require a machine that delivers continuous positive airway pressure, or a CPAP machine. And that's basically fitted over your nose and mouth, and it delivers a constant flow of oxygen. And that can be really a lifesaver for a lot of people in helping them get enough sleep. For me, I've found that I have to blow a fan on my face, so I'll use either a ceiling fan or a fan next to my bed, and I find that helps me to ensure that I get enough air. Apnea can also have different levels of severity depending on the person. So someone else may actually need a CPAP machine. Another common sleep disorder could be nightmares. Nightmares are disturbing dreams that occur during REM sleep. So that's because dreams typically occur during REM, and so that's when your nightmares occur. So these are very disturbing dreams. And now this may not necessarily be a disorder per se. It may be just a once in a while thing that everybody has, but it can be a disorder if it's ongoing. And frequent nightmares can be a symptom of other psychological disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, when I was in college, I experienced some nightmares because I was homesick, I think. And so some stress can bring it on. So let's look at some common causes of nightmares. So some common causes of nightmares include stress. It could also include simply watching a scary movie before going to sleep. So your mind is already on the scared side. So when you dream, you're going to be dreaming about something scary. Other common causes include mood disorders like anxiety or depression. Another cause is post-traumatic stress disorder. I mentioned trauma earlier. And so some people may have trauma that is coming out decades later, and that can come out in the form of nightmares. Other common causes include sleep deprivation. If you're not getting enough sleep at night, then it can cause you to have nightmares. And also chemicals or substances such as medication or the use of drugs or alcohol can also bring on nightmares as well. And lastly, eating food before bedtime can also cause nightmares, especially if you have a large meal late at night or if you have a lot of carbs or desserts. That can also cause nightmares, especially if you have it right before going to sleep. A parasomnia is another name for abnormal behavior associated with sleeping. So we've talked about other sleep disorders. We've talked about insomnia. But parasomnia, specifically about behavior that's associated with sleeping. And parasomnias are dissociated sleep states that are basically partially waking up during the transition between falling asleep or being in non-REM sleep or being in REM sleep. So if at any point or at any of these transitions, if you wake up partially, which people can, they can wake up partially, then they may experience some abnormal behavior. And that is commonly due to poor quality of sleep. So we're going to look at non-REM related parasomnias first. So as I said, parasomnias have to do with the breakdown in the transitions between being awake and being asleep and the different stages of sleep. And so the first category about the non-REM, meaning the first part of being asleep or falling asleep. So, and these include things like sleepwalking, sleep terrors, sleep eating, and sleep sex. All of these tend to occur in the first stages of sleep, in the non-REM stages of sleep. So let's talk about sleepwalking. Sleepwalking is also known as somnambulism. That was a word that basically means moving around during your sleep. Ambulism meaning moving. So sleepwalking occurs during non-REM sleep. So it's not during dreaming, as you might think. People are not actually dreaming when they're walking around. In fact, they can have their eyes open, and yet they're under a sleep state. Activities can include walking around or even leaving the bedroom. They can even talk in their sleep. I remember growing up when I was sharing a bedroom with my twin brother. He was in the same room as me. I would sometimes hear him mumbling in his sleep. He would count to or say a few numbers or mumble in his sleep. And sometimes we would joke about the other person making some kind of confession or saying something. And I've joked about that with my wife because sometimes we've caught each other sleep talking. And so we'll joke about each other making some kind of confession. Also, sleepwalking can include going to the bathroom, which is now a lot of people will go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. However, if you don't remember anything, that could be a problem. And sometimes people will go to the bathroom in the wrong places. Other activities will include eating and drinking in their sleep. So again, some people will go get a midnight snack, but eating and drinking while you're sleeping can actually be problematic, especially if you don't want to eat a lot or drink a lot. And especially if you're eating a lot, there's actually sleep-related eating disorders where people will continue to eat and gain a lot of calories because they're doing it while they're sleeping and they can't stop it because they're sleeping. Another activity could even include cooking food, which is really amazing if you think about it. These can include very complicated activities. So, for example, I remember when I was staying with my father, my dad, and he suffered from sleep apnea. And there was times when he would get up at 4 a.m. and wake everybody up in the house and ask if they all wanted to have breakfasts, or 5 a.m. And so, interestingly, I remember once, I believe my sisters took him up on the offer, and so he went to the kitchen and fried everybody some eggs, and then he went back to sleep. The next morning, he did not remember any of it. And it was interesting because I think my brother said he saw him walking around. He had a blanket over his head walking around. And so you could tell he was like asleep. But it was weird because he was doing all these things and didn't remember any of it. So people can do really complex things while they're sleepwalking. Another activity that people engage in is if they're living with a partner or married, is that they may engage in sexual activity in their sleep. And this is also known as sexsomnia or sleep sex. So, of course, you want to make sure that it's consensual, but it's kind of hard to ensure that if someone's actually sleepwalking or they're engaged in it in their sleep. So that's why you may want to talk about this beforehand, before you go to sleep, if this is a potential issue. Somnambulism or sleepwalking is more common among children, but it can occur in adults. Like I said with my dad, he suffered from sleep apnea, and that is a common cause for sleepwalking among adults. This is because it fragments people's sleep. They're not getting good quality sleep, and so they find themselves going back and forth between being awake and being asleep. So they can get caught in that transition, and where they wake up but they're actually still asleep. So then they can start engaging in behaviors like that. Another complication that could bring this on is acid reflux. So people who have acid reflux also oftentimes have insomnia, some sleep apnea, and restless leg syndrome, all of which we've talked about. And these things can bring on sleepwalking because it interferes with the transition between being awake and falling asleep into non-REM sleep. Another common sleep disorder are night terrors. And these are when a person experiences extreme fear and screams, flails, or runs around during deep sleep, without waking fully. And these are often paired with sleepwalking, but it doesn't have to be. They could simply be in their bed screaming. And this affects 40% of children and is relatively rare among adults. So it's commonly a childhood problem, as most children outgrow them by their teenage years. While it does look very frightening, these are usually not a cause for concern. I've seen this happen with one of my relatives. One of my nieces. She had a night terror, and we all tried to comfort her, but she was sleeping the whole time. And I picked her up and just held her, and she stopped screaming. And I just put her back to bed, and that was it. And she didn't remember anything the next day. But that's because this is a deep sleep in which they are not necessarily dreaming. They are just in a really deep sleep, that later stage of non-REM sleep. And so they might experience fear and scream and that sort of thing. And now they might actually have some dream going along with it, but it's not a typical REM dream, which we're going to talk about. REM dreams are more vivid. So these occur in non-REM sleep. And while your typical nightmare occurs in REM sleep. So nightmares, think about it this way, nightmares occur in REM sleep. Night terrors occur in non-REM sleep. And night terrors can result in people actually moving around because it's happening in that non-REM zone. So sleep fragmentation can cause some of these parasomnias. Sleep fragmentation results in difficulties in entering or staying in the states of sleep. And these are usually due to stress and sleep apnea that basically interrupts your sleep. And so that can cause you to have it can cause you to get stuck in one of those transitions. So let's talk about REM-related parasomnias. So we've talked about non-REM parasomnias, but REM parasomnias include things like narcolepsy, hypnagogic hallucinations, REM behavior disorder, and dreaming while awake. So basically, this means that these all have to do with the interruption of REM sleep or going back and forth between being awake and in REM sleep. Because REM sleep is the deepest state, and so this is one that could have the most interesting effects. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder in which a person can fall immediately into REM sleep during the day without warning. It is known as a chronic sleep disorder that causes overwhelming or excessive daytime drowsiness. So they may not go into dreaming right away, but it's known to cause people to go into that REM sleep within a matter of 15 minutes. Oftentimes people have a hard time staying awake because of this. And so there's something that's going on in the brain that is breaking down the barrier between the different states of being awake and being asleep. People who have narcolepsy can also see hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations. Those basically mean hallucinations that occur as you're either falling asleep or waking up. So if you're seeing things as you're waking up or falling asleep, those are hallucinations that are caused by your that transition in falling asleep or waking up. There's something going on in the transition that causes you to see things because you're still asleep, or you're actually starting to see things in your dream. You're like dreaming awake, basically. Another common disorder is all right. Now this is not that common, but it is still common, especially among men over 60. REM behavior disorder, which most often affects men over 60. This most often affects men over 60, is especially hazardous because the mechanism that blocks movement of voluntary muscles fails. So if you think about it, remember when you're in REM sleep, your muscles are typically paralyzed. So usually, even if you have a nightmare, you might be screaming in your mind, but nothing will be coming out of your mouth because your body is usually paralyzed during REM sleep. You are usually frozen, not moving at all. You're sleeping like a log because that's usually what happens during REM sleep. Your brain is working, but the rest of your body is frozen and shut down. But sometimes that mechanism that blocks the movement of voluntary muscles fails. So this causes the person to thrash around and get out of bed and to act out their nightmares while still asleep. And thus they're removed from their conscious controls and inhibitions. So people might actually act out a dream. And this particularly, unfortunately, is associated with nightmares. So people might be screaming, running around, or they might leap, they might fight, they might scratch the partner, they might even hit their partner next to them in bed. So it can actually be deadly for their partner if it's not controlled. There have been incidences in which people have been murdered while sleeping, or they've been murdered by their partner who is basically sleeping. And that's very rare, of course, but REM behavior disorder can cause people to do things that are strange. So this is different from other disorders because it occurs during REM sleep. And so people are essentially responding to a dream, often a nightmare, as I said, as if it's really happening. And behaviors can include shouting, swearing, flailing, grabbing, punching, kicking, jumping, and leaping. However, it's not a psychiatric or mental health disorder, but rather it's an organic brain disorder. That's because there's something going on with the brain, and there could be medical complication. So let's just contrast somnambulism or sleepwalking with REM behavior disorder. Sleepwalking occurs during non-REM sleep, whereas REM behavior disorder occurs during REM sleep when muscles are supposed to be paralyzed. So let's look at the difference between somnambulism and REM behavior disorder. They may look or sound the same, but they're actually very different. Sleepwalking occurs during non-REM sleep, whereas REM behavior disorder occurs during REM sleep. And during REM sleep, your muscles are supposed to be paralyzed, but in this disorder, they're not like they're supposed to be. In sleepwalking, they're not dreaming per se, although they might have a light dream, but they're typically interacting with their environment as if they are awake. They just happen to be asleep. In REM behavior disorder, they are dreaming. They're actually responding to a dream, but they're responding by moving around as if they're actually in the dream. And so they may flail, scream, hit, or leap. For example, if somebody is dreaming about catching a football, they might jump out of the bed to catch the football. And that would be an example of that. Now that's different from, some people will have like a hypnic jerk as they're falling asleep, but that's typically when that's typically in the beginning stages of falling asleep. And that's not during your most vivid types of dreams, which is in REM sleep. In REM sleep, these are very vivid dreams, and so people might even have conversations or they might actually think they're playing football and go for the ball. Or they might have a nightmare. Usually REM behavior disorders, they are having nightmares, and so they might be screaming. They might think that someone's attacking them, so they'll fight back. And so that can have some consequences for the person who's sleeping next to them. In somnambulism, usually this has much more complex actions like walking, talking, eating, cooking food, or even sexual activity. However, in REM behavior disorder, the actions are much more simple. And so that's because they are dreaming and they are otherwise supposed to be, their muscles are supposed to be paralyzed. And so they're typically not going to do a lot of complex movements. So they're not going to walk, nor have their eyes open, nor leave the room. They're much less aware of their surroundings. Whereas in sleepwalking, they might engage in sleep talking, which is more prevalent during non-REM sleep. With REM behavior disorder, they might sleep talk too, and they actually might even have very elaborate conversations as if the other person is there talking to them back. And so that's one of the differences. In sleepwalking, or in REM, non-REM sleep, people tend to have lucid dreams, but they're more thought-like and less vivid. In REM sleep, your dreams are much more vivid. And so if you're reacting as if you're in the dream. Whereas sleepwalking, it's just more like, you're just thinking. It's like you're thinking. It's not a vivid fantasy or like a dream world that you're in. It's much more mundane, in fact. In sleepwalking, it's hard to wake up and they will not remember anything. And if you find somebody sleepwalking, it's best to just direct them back to bed. You don't want to try to wake anybody up because it can get aggressive or because they're not fully under control of their conscious mind. So, but whereas in REM behavior disorder, if they wake up, they will remember that they were dreaming. They will think, wow, that was an interesting dream I had. Okay, let's talk about dreams. What is the nature of dreams? This is a Native American dream catcher. It's designed to help people catch dreams. Okay, so several theories have been proposed to explain why dreams occur. Sigmund Freud believed that dreams represented our repressed thoughts and desires. So Freud thought dreams were a manifestation of our repressed desires coming out, basically. And there's probably some truth in this. I especially like how he differentiated the content of the dream. So he called the actual content of the dream the manifest content, and yet he believed that the real underlying meaning of the dream is the latent content. For example, I've shared in the past how I had a nightmare once about a lion trying to break into my house. And so when I woke up and processed this dream, I thought about the content. So the manifest content would be this lion trying to break into my house. That's manifest. But manifest is not necessarily the actual, what meaning of it. So the underlying meaning of the dream is the latent content. And this was probably related to some trauma that I experienced when I was a child. And the lion trying to break into the house was symbolic or representative of it in a sense. And my brain was simply working through that trauma still. And we might have similar experiences in other ways as well. So that's why Freud believed that dreams were a representation of our repressed desires. Sometimes if, people have, Freud talked a lot about sexuality. So one of the most common themes in dreams are sex related. And so, of course, he would say that, dreams are a way for our sexual desires to be released or to be processed. Another theory is the activation synthesis hypothesis. This was originally proposed by Hobson and McCarley and suggests that dreams occur when the cerebral cortex attempts to fit together or synthesize random neural input from the lower brain structures. So again, this is a hypothesis that says that dreams are a synthesis of random input from the lower brain structures. Basically, when we go about our day, we create memories, and our brain has to organize these and sort through them. So sometimes, as the brain is sorting through things and connecting things, it might actually create a story or a narrative that essentially is a dream. And so that's why this is called the activation synthesis. It is synthesizing the information essentially into the brain. And so that is a hypothesis. Explains how dreams are produced. And that's actually the theory I hold to the most. I believe that's really essentially what dreams are. Is our brains are going to work to clean house and organize and clean up things while we're sleeping. Okay, so as we talked about the nature of sleep and dreams, it's also important to understand how these things are connected to our health. So our body needs physical rest. Sleep is very important to our physical health for a number of reasons. First, sleep helps heal. It heals and repairs your heart and your blood vessels. If we're constantly on the go, it doesn't give our cardiovascular system a chance to rest. So when we sleep, our heart can actually physically rest and slow down. Because it never stops, our heart is constantly beating. So it needs some time to slow down and relax a little. And so that is when we sleep. So it gives our heart, our cardiovascular system, a chance to heal and repair. Also, our muscles need time to heal, especially if you've been exercising or you worked out or you've exerted your muscles. Your muscles also need time to repair and heal, and that's done primarily when you're sleeping. So if you're trying to build muscles and you're exercising at the gym, then you really need to make sure you get adequate sleep, because that helps you to rebuild your muscles. Sleep also helps to rebuild your immune system. If you don't get enough sleep, it's going to compromise your immune system. You're going to be more susceptible to colds and viruses and things like that. So if you want to maintain your immune system, you need to get enough sleep. Sleep also helps to clear neurotoxins from the brain. Basically, our brains can build up toxins, and sleep is an important, it's important for cleaning house, literally. And if we don't get enough sleep, this can lead to a buildup, and the buildup of toxins in the brain has been linked to Alzheimer's disease. So that's, I don't know if they have conclusively linked directly, but if you want to make sure you don't have the buildup of toxins, then you might want to get enough sleep. Also, sleep is important for managing your blood sugar. Your glucose levels drop while you're sleeping. And if you don't get enough, and which is good because it allows your system to reset itself. So if you don't get enough sleep, and it doesn't give your body that chance to slow down in its sugar, and so you'll end up having a high level of sugar all the time. And poor sleep is linked to diabetes. Okay, so if you don't get enough sleep, as we've seen, it can indirectly possibly be related to Alzheimer's disease. It is definitely connected to heart disease, kidney disease. It can be connected to high blood pressure, stroke. It can also be connected to diabetes. And it messes with your appetite, which can also be one reason why poor sleep is highly linked to obesity as well. So if you want to lose weight, then you need to make sure you get enough sleep. Sleep is also important for our mental health. Sleep is important for improving your memory. For if you're trying to remember people's names, remember things for school, you need to get enough sleep because that improves your memory ability. And sleep is also important for our mood. If we don't get enough sleep, we're actually more susceptible to being cranky and sensitive to our emotions. We'll talk about that more in a second. Sleep problems can be a symptom of, it can also be a symptom of mental health problems like mania or depression. People who suffer from depression, for example, may have difficulty falling asleep. And that's a big problem. One of the symptoms of depression is insomnia. And so something to be aware of. Sleep problems are common in people with anxiety, depression, bipolar, and ADHD. So especially anxiety and depression. Anxiety, of course, makes sense because if you're always anxious, your mind is always going, you're going to have a hard time resting and getting sleep. But sleep problems can also actually contribute to mental disorders. It's not only it's cyclical. If you look at the diagram, mental disorders can cause sleep problems, but sleep problems can also cause mental disorders too, and because it can disrupt the body's ability to regulate itself. For example, we know that sleep problems will inhibit the ability of the prefrontal cortex to regulate emotions. If you're not getting enough sleep, then the prefrontal cortex will have more difficulty in regulating emotions, particularly those negative emotions like fear that come from the amygdala. And so it won't be able to override it like it needs to. So sleep helps strengthen the prefrontal cortex. And in addition to that, it would also help erode, poor sleep would erode self-control because of that. So you will have less self-control and you'll be more impulsive, making the wrong choices when you're not getting enough sleep. Okay, so sleep is very important to us on a day-to-day basis. If you want to have a good day, wake up on the right side of the bed, then you need to make sure you get enough sleep. And it sets the trajectory for your whole day. You'll feel better. You'll be more in tune with what's going on. You'll be more sharp. Your brain will be sharp. And it will contribute to better physical health. So how can we improve our sleep? We've talked about the importance of sleep, but what can we do to actually improve the quality of sleep or the amount of sleep we get? First of all, one thing you want to do is cut out stimulants like caffeine and nicotine. If you're drinking too much coffee or getting too much caffeine and nicotine, you may have a hard time going to sleep at night. Especially if your body hasn't been able to get rid of the stimulants in your body. And if you're addicted to something, then your body will be on one hand craving that, and then when you get it, it's going to stimulate again, so you will have difficulty falling asleep. So the best thing is, some people think, well, I just won't drink coffee at night. Well, if your body's craving it, then you're going to have a hard time sleeping too, because it's not getting the caffeine. And then when it does, it's going to wake you up. So you're going to be stuck either way. So the best thing really is to just cut all stimulants from your intake. Don't take any caffeine or nicotine. Cut it completely altogether. Another thing you can do is get enough physical exercise. Physical exercise actually helps you deepen your sleep. Burns off your cortisol, burns off your stress, helps you get rid of the anxious energy, and then it tires you out so that when you do go to sleep, you can actually go into a deeper sleep. Sometimes people aren't able to sleep because they've been sitting all day, or they haven't really moved much. And so when they do try to go to sleep, they're restless because their body hasn't really gotten any exercise. So one thing you can do to improve your sleep is exercise during the day. The third thing is sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene is basically referring to habits or lifestyle habits that help prepare you for a good night's sleep. So this includes things like having a regular sleep-wake schedule, going to sleep at the same time every day, and waking up at the same time every day. If you get off that cycle or routine, you might have a hard time going to sleep when you need to. If you've always been up late every night and then you try to go to sleep at a decent hour, you might have a hard time. Also, having a comfortable and clean and dark room can make a difference. If you feel like your room is cluttered and it's dirty and you got stuff everywhere, it may make it hard for you to actually relax. Also, you want to have a dark room. If there's lights that are pouring in or coming in from the outside window or under the door crack, try to make it as dark as possible. And then also, one reason why people don't have darkness is because sometimes they're looking at screens, like either they're watching media or they're on their phones at night, and that actually can work against you because your eyes are. It tricks the eyes into thinking that it's daytime. It actually interferes with their circadian rhythms. So the key is really to make your body believe that it's getting dark out, and then it starts to produce those hormones that will help you be able to fall asleep. And also remove other distractions. Like if you're on your phone all the time, it's just going to make you more anxious. So you want your room to be a place where it's relaxing and comfortable. The fourth thing you can do is just try simple relaxation and breathing techniques. You might try meditation or prayer. Those help you activate your parasympathetic system, and breathing helps you to slow your heart rate down a little, and it helps you calm your nerves. And so those are some things you can try doing. And lastly, if none of those strategies work, then you can try seeing a therapist and using cognitive behavioral therapy that may be able to get at some of the thoughts that you're ruminating about and help you put a stop to those negative thoughts that keep you up at night. So we want to try to make your room a nice place to be, a retreat or sanctuary where it's free from media distractions. Let's take a spiritual look at the subject of sleep. In the Bible, it says that God created the cycle of night and day, which contributes to our circadian rhythms. And it also says that God himself rested. Let's look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. It says that God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. So we can see that according to Genesis, God created this 24-hour cycle of night and day. And that is where our circadian rhythms are based on. But continuing on in chapter 2, verse 2, it says, "And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done." It's interesting, the word Sabbath literally simply means rest. Sabbath, sabado, in Spanish, I believe, is the seventh day. Literally just means rest. So he rested on the seventh day. Now, as we've seen, God created this cycle of rest. He created our daily circadian rhythms, and he also created the weekly cycle. Both of these are times when we can rest. We can rest on the Sabbath. We can also physically and spiritually, but each night we can rest physically from the day. And that is all part of God's creation. He created a cycle of rest and activity. It's all part of this cycle of life. And both are important. We tend to focus on the activity. We forget that we do need to rest. Rest is very important for our health. And so we can think about the seasons of life and times. All these are part of God's creation. God created these for us as a gift to us because it helps us to heal physically, mentally, and spiritually. Now, interestingly, the Bible says that many of us are not actually able to enter into this rest. I want to look at this passage in Hebrews 4 more carefully. A lot of people think that this passage in Hebrews 4 is implying that the Sabbath doesn't really apply. I don't believe that's what Hebrews 4 is saying at all. It simply says, if anything, people might keep the Sabbath, but they don't really understand what it means to rest. And so, which is really the greater significance anyway. People can actually, observe a day of rest, but not actually rest. I know many people, for example, who go to church on a Sunday or Saturday, and then they go right back to work right afterward. Is that really a rest, or is it just an observance of a day? And so all of us can fall into this trap where we might think we're resting, but we're really not. And so that's why I believe the writer of Hebrews is inviting us to really find out what it means to rest. And so Hebrews 4 says, "There remains therefore a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from his." So Jesus rested, God rested. It says, as we saw in the creation story, even God rested from his work. So if God can rest, then surely we must rest also. But what does it mean to rest? What does it mean to rest from our work? So many of us have a hard time going to sleep at night simply because we're still trying to work. We're trying to work on our relationships. We're trying to figure out how to solve problems. We're still trying to do work, and in fact, some of us are on our phones. But to rest at night simply means that we have to be able to surrender the things that worry us, the things that stress us out. Surrender it to God and trust that he will take care of it for us so we can go to sleep at night and actually have peace. I just want to end with this one verse, and this is from Psalm 4:8. And this is the psalmist writing, "I will lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." This is just a reminder for us that we can find peace and sleep in peace at night because we know that God is taking care of all of our problems, and we can dwell in safety in him. He will take care of everything for us. And we don't, Jesus tells us today has enough days, enough worries of its own. And so why worry about tomorrow? So all we need to do is just worry about today, and that's it. But then at the end of the day, there's nothing left to worry about. The day is over, and all we can do is go to sleep and just trust that God will take care of it. So that's my hope for you, that you can find that peace in your life. We're going to go on to chapter 17 next, and that is called Earth Calling Anyone Home. And we're going to talk about blocks to awareness, and I hope you can join me for that chapter. Thank you.